7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Assalamualaikum and good evening everyone. Welcome to Open Science webinar series brought to you by USM Library. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Nur Adila Azmi. I'm a senior librarian from Hamzah Senduk Library, University Science Malaysia, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. We would like to welcome our special guest for today's webinar, Miss Megan Herdeman. How are you, Miss Megan?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Great. Okay, we can't wait to listen to your presentation today. We would like to also thanks to all the viewers live from our YouTube channel and Facebook page. Okay, I can see that we have many participants from various institutions, not merely from Malaysia, but also from abroad. Please introduce yourself through chat box, either in YouTube or Facebook page, and enjoy this webinar. Before we start, I want to make a few announcements. Okay, all the participants will be given e-certificate and CPD points for USM staff. You just need to fill in our feedback form. The link of the e-feedback form will be given towards the end of our session. Meanwhile, at any time during this session, you can ask any question related to the Figshare at the chat box, either in YouTube or Facebook page. You just type a question, question, and followed by your own question in the chat box. Next, our committee will compile them and we will bring the relevant question to the speakers during the Q&A session. For your information, this webinar will be recorded. You can just go to our YouTube and Facebook page to view this webinar later. Now we have to come to our main agenda, whereby we're going to listen to the tips and guidance from our distinguished speaker. But before that, let me introduce Miss Megan. Megan has been working with institutions and communities to encourage research data sharing and management with Figshare for over 5 years. Her work involves sharing research data stories in the form of case studies, presentations, webinars, podcasts, and more. She also managed the Figshare Ambassador Program. Prior to working at Figshare, she was a product manager at Emerald Publishing. Therefore, without further ado, I would like to call upon Ms. Megan to proceed with her presentation entitled Using Figshare for Storing, Sharing and Managing Research Data. Please welcome Ms. Megan.
Oh, thank you so much, Adela. It was a lovely introduction. Thank you. I will share my screen so you can see my presentation. Hopefully that's working. Okay. Yes, thank you so much for having me this afternoon. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here with you. My presentation is titled Using Figshare for Storing, Sharing, and Managing Research Data while making it discoverable and citable. So a few of the things that we're going to cover this afternoon. I'm going to start off with a little introduction to Figshare and what it is, and how it came about, things like that. Also give a bit of an introduction about what research data management is, For anyone who might not be familiar, it will be a bit of a scratching of the surface. So research data management is quite a large area of study and practice. So but I'll go through the highlights. And then I'll talk a bit about features and functionality of Figshare, so how it works and why people use it and what it's being used for, the type of data that's being stored and shared on Figshare. I'll talk a bit about Figshare in Malaysia, so a few use cases of how it's being used. I'll highlight a few of the ambassadors as well, because there are a few in Malaysia. And then I'll finish with an impact case study of a researcher who shared their data, practiced good research data management, and what happened as a result. And then I will absolutely have some time for questions at the end. So yes, please do send in your questions. I'd be very happy to answer them. So starting with an introduction to Figshare. If you've never heard of Figshare before, it's a repository for securely storing, sharing, and managing your research data while making it discoverable and citable. So Figshare has been around since 2011, and it was founded by a researcher who was studying stem cell biology. And as part of his research, he had all of these videos of cells moving across the screen and all of this supplementary material that he wanted to publish alongside his articles. But the infrastructure for supporting that as part of publishing just wasn't available. But he still wanted to get credit for these videos and these this additional supplementary material that he made. So he founded Figshare. So that's why we have a lot of content on Figshare that is sort of above and beyond traditional supplemental materials. So we have lots of videos and audio files, and we have things like this image that you see on your screen now, which is a 3D model of a shark tooth, alongside more traditional outputs like images and data sets and things like that. So Figshare is really used for a wide breadth of research. And researchers use it sort of alongside publishing. They'll also publish things like presentations and posters that they publish at conferences. It's really anything that is related to the research that they're doing and is an output of their research. If you want to have a look at the sort of research outputs that are on Figshare, I've included a link here to our website, which is just figshare.com. And there's a link to that particular very cool 3D visualization of a shark tooth there as well. From the storing perspective, Figshare is a cloud-based piece of infrastructure. So you don't have to be sort of on site somewhere to access it. It's available wherever you are, which is quite handy right now if lots of people are working from home. Accounts on Figshare are allocated 20 gigabytes of private storage. So if you're using Figshare to store your data, maybe with the intention of making it sort of publicly available at a time that's appropriate to do so, then you have 20 gigabytes of storage to do that. And unlimited public storage. So as soon as you decide to make those research outputs publicly available, then that doesn't count towards your 20 gigabytes. You have unlimited public storage. And it's all available through AWS. Yeah. In terms of sharing, excuse me, that aspect, everything that is published on Figshare is assigned a digital object identifier, or a DOI. And this is used for sharing and citing in publications or elsewhere. Not just that, but DOIs also get versioned. So each time you come into Figshare, make changes to an item that you're uploading, maybe you add files to it, or you add some metadata, so some information describing the data, you get a new version for citing. You can also share directly on social media. So each item that gets published on Figshare, you have the ability to share it directly on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or your email directly from the item page. You can also embed on websites. So that could be like a personal website that you have, or if a particular lab that you work in or a project that you're working on has a website, then you can upload it onto Figshare, your research data onto Figshare, get a DOI for it that you can cite, but then you can also get an iframe and embed that on your website so that people can access your research data directly on your personal website. You still get all of the benefits of uploading it onto Figshare, like a DOI, and do things like tracking views and downloads and alt metrics and things like that, which I'll get into in a moment. On the managing side of things, you can upload any file type onto Figshare, so there's no restriction on the type of content, type of files that get uploaded. And you can even include things like README files. You can create single items or collections of items on Figshare as well. So you have the ability to organize your research data and your research outputs in a way that makes most sense for you and your research. And you can also, alongside giving your research lots of descriptive metadata, things like that, you can choose the license type and an embargo period, if applicable. So you have a lot of control over how others can reuse your data and be quite clear about any kind of restricted access that needs to be applied to your research data. So, sort of taking a step back a little bit, I wanted to explain a bit about what research data management is. So I mentioned that it is quite a wide-ranging area of study and practice. So this is just sort of the bare bones of what research data management is. But it is the practice of documenting and maintaining research data for the purpose of reuse. So that could be reusing it yourself. So if you have done a piece of research, a study that has come to some sort of conclusion, but in a few years you come back to it and want to build upon it, then if you have practiced good research data management, then it should be quite easy to pick it back up and reuse it yourself, but also for other people to reuse it. So things that get published on websites like Figshare are, unless there's an embargo period on it for commercial or sensitive, ethically sensitive reasons, it's openly and publicly available. So other people can reuse it, they can build upon it, they can cite it and give you credit, and you can track that reuse as well. So a few of the practices that result in good research data management. The first one is thorough metadata that describes the data so others can reuse it, and it's documented long after the researcher leaves the university. So the process of uploading into Figshare, which I'll show you in a moment, requires you to upload the research data or the research outputs that you're going to be uploading, as well as provide thorough metadata. So things like the title, the author, keywords, description, if there's any funding related to this data, things like that. The better documented the metadata is, the easier it is to reuse and the more likely it will be to be reused. Next is assigning an appropriate license for reuse that gives credit to the researcher. So the license that you choose when you upload sets the tone for how other people can reuse it, and sort of sets the boundaries for any sort of reuse. But it also means, people can have a clear understanding of what they can and cannot do with the outputs that you've uploaded, makes it easier for them to reuse it and to give you credit for it. Creating a DMP, or a data management plan, to ensure the data is stored safely and accurately during the course of the research and after it's complete. So data management plans are often created at the point in which a project is about to begin. It might be as part of a grant or a funding application that you might have to provide a data management plan, but it outlines the plan that you have for how you're going to store, share, manage the data that comes out of the research project that you're working on. So if you're thinking about how and where you're going to share your data before you've even done the research and compiled the data, that makes it a lot easier at the point in which you are ready to start publishing it and sharing it. And it means that it gets thoroughly documented along the way as well, because you have the intention from the very beginning of making it publicly available. There's a really nice video that I'm going to share now on an interview that we did with a researcher at Imperial College London. This was a couple of years ago now, but the message and the story is still very much relevant and very much important. So I will play this now. I hope you can hear that. I just realized that I got my headphones in. I'll put the captions on. So if you can't, then hopefully you can read the captions. Okay. Hopefully that worked okay and you're able to, to read the subtitles, but I'd be very happy to share a link to this video if you want to hear Henry and Charles talk about their experience as well. So that was a little bit about research data management. There is a lot more information on the topic if you want to dive a bit deeper into any of those particular areas. Especially as a side note, I just want to say this concept of fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. There's a lot of information around there about how to make your data fair and the benefits of making it fair. And we've done a little infographic on how your research data is more fair or fairer on Figshare, and I'd be happy to share that with anyone who might be interested in seeing it as well. So with that sort of preface in mind, how does Figshare work in order to help you better manage your data and share it and make it discoverable and all of that? So on Figshare, it's really easy to, once you've created an account, to log in and you're taken to an area called your My Data area. And this is where everything that you've ever uploaded into Figshare lives, whether it's private and you're making changes to it, or you've already published it and you want to go back in and add some files, change some metadata, anything like that, you can do that. So you'd be prompted to create an item to upload. You can drag and drop files into the browser, or you can browse your computer and grab one file or hundreds of files if you want to. And again, those can be any file type. Once you started uploading your files, you'd be prompted to fill in the metadata. So this is the information describing your research data. So things like title, authors, categories, keywords, description, anything that makes your research data more discoverable. So people on Figshare will often browse by certain categories, or they'll search based on particular keywords. And so the better described your data is in Figshare, the more likely that someone is going to find what they're looking for when they're looking for the type of research that you do, and are able to reuse it and build upon it and access it. So you'd be prompted to fill in some of the metadata. Once you've filled in all of the required fields in order to publish, and those fields are generally the ones that appear in a citation. So the big hitters, the title, authors, the license, descriptions, things like that. If you're ready to publish, then you can tick publish at the bottom and make it publicly available. If it's not ready to be published, or you need to do things like place an embargo on it, then you have the option to do that as well. So it's a 3-step process, really, and we try to make it as easy as possible. Researchers are busy and we don't want to take up any more time than is necessary. So yeah, basically a 3-step process to making your research data publicly available. So why do researchers use Figshare to store their research data? So I'll talk a little bit more about some of the features and functionality in a bit more depth now. So on Figshare, you can store your outputs in any file format, as I mentioned before. You can also securely collaborate with researchers from other institutions. So we have spaces called projects. I'll get a bit more into those in a moment, where you can invite people to join your project, and they can be people from your institution or outside your institution. And it allows you to upload files and leave comments and things like that directly in the project space. Everything on Figshare gets a citable DOI that is publicly available. And it's quite easy to demonstrate impact with things like alt metrics, usage metrics, and citation counts. I'll get into alt metrics and what those are in a bit as well, if that's something that's new to you. And in terms of usage metrics, we track things like views and downloads. for the life of your item, as long as it's publicly available. And researchers also use Figshare for open access funder compliance. So if you've received a grant in which your funder requires that the outputs of the grant be made openly available and freely available, you know, with a DOI, then Figshare meets those funder requirements. It also helps others discover your outputs because we mark up items on Figshare for indexing in Google Scholar and Google Dataset Search. Google Dataset Search is a fairly new search engine within Google's sort of suite of search engines. So you might not have heard of it, but it is specifically for looking for data sets. So Scholar is more papers, more traditional research outputs. And some of the content is marked up, some of the content on Figshare is marked up for indexing in Scholar where it's appropriate. So things like theses, Green OA outputs get uploaded into Figshare occasionally as well. Those will be in Scholar. And then things like data sets get indexed in Google Dataset Search. We also meet accessibility standards. So a couple of the standards that are listed here, which are sort of in the process of being implemented and enforced on websites all over the world. Figshare has worked really hard over the last 12 months or so, and continuing to do so on certain sort of back-end pages on Figshare to meet these accessibility standards so that it's easier for everyone to use Figshare and to access research data on Figshare. So I mentioned that everything on Figshare gets a DOI and that we support versioning as well. So every time you go in and make a change to an item and publish it again, we generate a new version of the DOI. And you can go back through all of the old versions and have a look at what the data and the metadata looked like at that particular point in time when that version was generated. And some people, like this case that you can see here, will programmatically mint a new version of a DOI at a specific time every day. And this is because this is coming from an outside source where they make updates to the files and then they generate a new version, and they do all of that programmatically. So they have, I mean, this screenshot is what, almost a year old, so I should probably get a new one, but there are now almost 2,000 versions of this particular item, and you can go back through all of them if you'd like and look at the old ones. We also have funding information on Figshare. So when you upload an item, there's a field called funding. And for this, we have an integration with Dimensions, which is a grants database and a sister company of Figshare, whereby you can put your grant number in, or your grant name, or your funder, and search for a particular, very specific grant, and have that be sort of associated with your item on Figshare. So you can say, this is the name of the grant that this particular research was funded by, and I can click on it, find out more. It'll take me to the Dimensions page where I can see all sorts of information about the grant. So the name of it, how much it was awarded for, who the PI is, who the other investigators are, and it just creates a link between the research data on Figshare and the funder and the funding information on Dimensions. Figshare also supports private links. So if you have uploaded your research data onto Figshare and you want to, before you publish it, generate a private link to share it with a colleague or some of your co-authors, just to have a look at it before you publish it, you can generate a private link and share that with them. The private links are also used for blind peer review purposes. So if you're submitting research data as part of a journal submission and it's going through the review process, then you could upload it onto Figshare, generate a private link, and share that private link with the publisher, and it will remove author information. And if your institution is using Figshare for Institutions, which is an institutional repository, then it will remove your institutional branding as well and replace it with Figshare branding. You can also disable access to the private link at any time. So you have control over how that link can be accessed through disabling it. So a general sort of rule of thumb, which is often used in the research data space and that Figshare supports as well, is that your research outputs should be as open as possible but as closed as necessary. So control over your outputs is the most important thing. So if it can be publicly available, then we believe it should be, with the right license. But if it needs to be under an embargo or restricted access, then Figshare would support that as well. So often researchers will use an embargo period because there is something in there that is commercially sensitive, or there are ethical sensitivities where the data can't be publicly available, but you want a record of it. To let people know that this research has been done, but it's not publicly available unless maybe you have the right credentials. But all of the metadata is available and you still get a DOI for it, things like that. So you have the ability to set embargoes either permanently, so for the life of the item as long as it's on Figshare, or for a finite amount of time. And we'll count down the days until your embargo is lifted, and then it becomes automatically available once the embargo period is ended. But you can come back in and extend the embargo period if you need to do that. I mentioned earlier about this collaboration space that we have on Figshare, and that's within projects. So projects are spaces where you can invite people to your project and they can upload content into it. You can add either collaborators or viewers. So collaborators can also upload content into your project, and viewers can just see what's in the project, but they can't upload anything. So you can invite people who use Figshare.com, which is sort of the free version of Figshare, or you can invite people who don't have a Figshare account to join your project, and it'll prompt them to create a Figshare account. And once they've done that, then they can join your project. You can either keep it private or choose to make it public. So projects start off as private, and all of the content that you upload in it starts off as private. And then at the point in which you might be ready to start publishing the items in the project, you can publish the individual items when you're ready to do so. And then you can choose to publish the project space as a whole if you want to as well, to provide a bit of context to each of the individual items within the project. We also have something on Figshare called collections, which are ways of grouping individual items together. So where projects are sort of private collaborative spaces, collections, everything is publicly available. And it can be content that you yourself have uploaded onto your account on Figshare, or things that other people have uploaded. Maybe there's a particular theme that you want to group your items around. Collections allow you to do that. So it allows you to showcase your data under a particular theme. So this screenshot of a collection that you can see here is around the happiness of software developers. There are quite a few authors to it. So the person who created the project, Daniel, has added items to the collection that belong not just to him, but to a few other authors as well. Collections themselves get DOIs as well, which is quite nice. So if you have individual items that need their own metadata, they need to be grouped as individual items, then you can still group them in a collection as a whole and share the DOI for the collection and say, this is a collection of my outputs. They're all grouped together under this particular theme. Here you go. And just like items, collections, we support versions. So you can come back in and add items to your collection, add metadata, and generate a new version. And you can go back and look at the old ones as well. And we also track things like metrics and usage metrics and citations on collections as well. So I myself have a collection of research data outputs that institutions who use Figshare as a sort of institutional data repository, they upload things that they have uploaded. I've grouped them into a collection. So it could be presentations they've given, or posters they've made, or like flyers that they've done, things like that. I've used a collection to group them all together. So I mentioned that we track usage metrics on Figshare, so things like views and downloads and citations, but we also track alt metrics. So if this is a new concept to you, alt metric is a platform that is also a sister company of Figshare, but they track alternative metrics on the sort of attention that you might get from your research output. So things like citations can sometimes be a bit one-sided in how they sort of look at how the sort of attention that your research data has received, and it can also take a long time to come through. So looking at the sort of publication process and how long that might take, it can often be a long time to track citations. So alt metrics are ways of looking at attention on more immediate platforms. So things like news outlets and blog posts and patents and social media. There's all kinds of different attention sources that altmetric tracks. And so anytime your content, so either the DOI or the URL, is mentioned in any of these places that altmetric uses as a source, it will appear as a piece of attention on your research data. So this happens automatically on Figshare. And if there is altmetric attention, you can click on the donut and it'll take you to altmetric, and you can look exactly where your research data has seen attention through altmetric. So yeah, I think a combination of altmetrics and citations creates a more holistic look at how your research data is being used, both in the more immediate sense and in sort of the longer term sense in terms of citations, things like that. Figshare also has an API, so if you would like to programmatically move content into Figshare or out of Figshare, then you can do that with an API. This example that you see here, the researchers stored the raw data on Figshare, which is this image on the left here. And then on the right, they have a WordPress hosted website where they create visualizations from the raw data. So they make an API call to Figshare and visualize that raw data directly into their sort of personal university website. So there's lots you can do with the API. You can use it to just upload really big files or lots of files into Figshare. Or you can take it out of Figshare and do some cool things with it, like create visualizations. We also have an FTP uploader. So just say with the API, there's quite a steep learning curve, so you do need to know some programming. But if that's not your area of expertise, but you still have large files or many files that you'd like to upload onto Figshare, then we have an FTP option, which is a bit more user-friendly for people like me who don't know what they're doing with an API. So yeah, it makes it a little bit easier than uploading through the browser where you might struggle bandwidth-wise. We also have a GitHub integration. So if you use GitHub for writing code, and you'd like to take a snapshot of what the code looked like at a certain point in time, get a DOI for it, you can sync your GitHub account to your Figshare account, and yeah, create that snapshot. The example that I showed earlier with the lots of different versions on an item, this is that same item, and that's how they create all of those versions. It's through the GitHub integration, and that is all done programmatically without them having to do very much work. We have lots more integrations as well. Things like electronic lab notebooks, OSF, if you use that, there's an integration with our projects there. Every time we find a new integration, whether that's one that we've developed or the community has developed using the API, then we add it to this integrations page. And the link to that is at the bottom, which is knowledge.figshare.com/apps. I mentioned earlier about funder compliance as well. I just want to show you an example of a collection on Figshare, so a group of individual items on Figshare that's been created specifically for funder compliance and for an assessment body, really. So they've created a collection where each individual item is a single output, but some of them are more documentation that the funder and the assessment body require and be publicly available as part of the research output. So things like a 300-word statement and a research timeline are all part of the documentation, and then alongside that is the sort of actual project documentation and some photos and videos of the research that they've done, all grouped together within that single collection with that single DOI that they can then present to the funder. So what do researchers store in Figshare? Well, lots of different things. You can upload any file format, but we aim to preview most of them in the browser. So when you go to an item on Figshare, you will immediately see the file at the top and all of the metadata at the bottom. So most of the time you will see a preview of what the file looks like. So if it's anything like a video, audio, image, spreadsheet data, 3D files, all of that, we preview all of those in the browser, so you can view the video directly without necessarily having to download it in order to use it, which is really nice from an engagement perspective. So things like .mov files, that's what that looks like. Images are sort of the dominant visual for the item on Figshare, so you can see that immediately when you click on the item. Audio files, you can play them directly in the browser without necessarily having to download them, and have all of the functionality around pausing it and playing it and changing the volume and things like that. 3D files are actually interactive, so you can click on the file, you can move it around 360 degrees, you can zoom in, zoom out, all of that without having to have the software required in order to run the file. So I would know the first thing about finding software to play, to visualize a 3D image, so it's very handy to have it done directly in the browser for me. Things like KML files or interactive maps, the exact same, you can interact with it directly in the browser without having to have the software to run it. It's quite nice. More traditional sort of papers and documents, there will be a preview for, and you can look through all. In this case, there are 9 pages in this one, and you can scroll through all of them directly in the browser. Code, so either coming from GitHub with that integration, or if it's just directly uploaded into Figshare, we will create a visualization of what that code looks like as best we can. Things like posters. So posters that are being presented at conferences will often be uploaded onto Figshare either before the poster is presented at the conference or after. And if it's done before, then people will often include like a QR code or a link to the DOI of the item on Figshare, so that people can, if they want to look at that poster a bit more in depth after the conference, or maybe they couldn't quite get up close to read all of it or anything like that, then they can have a look at it on their own time as well. Presentations, so PowerPoint presentations get uploaded onto Figshare as well, and you can scroll through all of the slides just like you can on like a paper. So yeah, lots of different content on Figshare, and lots of new use cases that I find out about all the time. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about Figshare in Malaysia and some of the content that has been published by researchers in Malaysia specifically. But first, I want to let you know about some of the ambassadors. So one of them might be familiar to you as a colleague, but there are a few others, other ambassadors based in Malaysia. So these are people who are passionate about open science and open research and open data, and want to spread the word. So if this is something that's of interest to you, we're always taking new applications for ambassadors. So if you just search for Figshare ambassadors, then you'll find some more information about what's involved in it, and how you can apply to become one if that's of interest to you. In terms of Malaysian research data in Figshare, there's quite a few different types of outputs. There are papers, so perhaps the more traditional sort of PDF output on Figshare. There are images, and in this case, there's 2 different files in this item on Figshare, but you can toggle between the 2 files if you want to have a look at them. But this is a map, which is a static image, so you can still zoom in and zoom out, but it's not quite that interactive KML file, but still quite interesting to look at. There's grant proposal, which is there's actually a case study that was published that I was involved in a couple of weeks ago, which explores how researchers have been uploading grant proposals onto Figshare. So whether they've been successful or not successful, they're still sharing them in order to sort of explain what worked and what didn't work, and provide some guidance, especially to early career researchers for whom writing grants might be a relatively new concept. It's helpful to see what other people have already written. There's also some spreadsheet data on Figshare. So this is an Excel file. And if you click on Explore More Content here, you can scroll through the spreadsheet directly in the browser. There's also some audio files as well of particular research. I must admit, I don't know what this is specifically. I know it's zoology, and it sounds really interesting. But yeah, I don't, as a somebody who's not a zoology expert, I don't know exactly what it is, but it's very interesting nevertheless. With the 10 minutes or so that we have left, I just want to finish off my presentation to you this afternoon with a little impact case study of a researcher who shared their data and what happened as a result. And then I'm very happy to take any questions. So this case study is with Alistair Ray, and Alistair was a researcher at the University of Sheffield. And the University of Sheffield uses Figshare as an institutional data repository. So they have an instance of Figshare where all of the researchers from the university will upload their research data into it, as opposed to the sort of free Figshare.com. So Alistair was a professor in urban studies and planning. He doesn't do this anymore. He sort of moved into sort of public sector work now. But at the time, this was a couple of years ago, he was at the University of Sheffield. And in 2015, he began a piece of analysis looking at census travel. So it was travel to work data in the US. So it was commuting data. So he looked at cities in the US and the suburbs around them and how people traveled from those suburbs into work in the city. So it's quite interesting data, something that's quite relevant and applicable to a lot of different people. But he published that data on Dropbox, and he put the working paper of it on the White Rose repository, which is their institutional paper repository at the University of Sheffield. Oops, sorry, I went too far ahead. So when that happened, somebody called Garrett Nelson, who was based in the US, so the University of Sheffield is in the UK, so it's a little bit removed from the actual US. But Garrett was based in the US and found the data and wanted to expand upon it. So he did so with the data on Dropbox, and Alistair shared some more data with him. And then they worked together to expand upon what Alistair had done initially. And when he did that, they sort of found some really interesting data, and they decided to build upon that working paper that Alistair had written already. So that paper was published in the journal on PLOS, and the data that was part of that journal, so all of that travel commuting data was published on the University of Sheffield's instance of Figshare. So it was all publicly available. It was really well documented. There was a README file around it. He basically just put everything up there that he couldn't put directly as supplemental information on the paper, just because the files were too large and it just didn't work with as more traditional publishing. So he has the article on PLOS, and he's got his research data on Figshare, and it takes off. So people found it really, really interesting. It got an article in Wired, National Geographic, and lots of writing about it, you know, on news outlets and social media and blog posts and all of that stuff. So it got picked up by a lot of different places, a lot of different people reusing it in ways that Alistair and Garrett hadn't ever considered could be done. But it was quite easy for them to do, to reuse it and to build upon it and things like that, because they made their research data open, well documented and easy to reuse. So I know there was a specific use case where I think it was somewhere in the southwest of the US. They were going to build a new baseball stadium, and they used the data that Alistair and Garrett had collected to determine where best to build it based on all of this information about how people are commuting and stuff like that. So things that they hadn't even considered it could be used for, it was used for. So there are a couple of thoughts that Alistair had in sort of speaking with him for this particular case study, particularly around the impact of sharing his data. So he said, had we not been so open with sharing our data, I think we would have had a lot of emailing us asking for the data and information on how we gathered it. I've had a lot of requests from journalists or people in different parts of the US saying how they felt this data verified what they thought about commuting. Getting all of our data up there has actually saved a lot of time and effort in the end. The exposure is good as well. People can spot anything that's wrong and we can easily correct it. So lots of great reasons to be sharing. Saves them a lot of time. Yeah, lots of great exposure and sort of crowdsourcing that editing side of it. So if they spot things that are wrong, then it makes it really easy for Alistair and Garrett to make any changes to that as well. So if you want to read that case study, read more about Alistair and Garrett's experience, including more information on why you should publish your data alongside your publications, how Alistair and Garrett promoted their data after they shared it on Figshare, which may have, and almost certainly did, have some impact on how it was received, and how many people looked at it and reused it and things like that, and how they decided on file formats and documentation to include in their Figshare file set or their item on Figshare. So that's really around the research data management side of it. So how did they decide what file formats to choose so that if in 10 years they need to access it again, will they have the right software to do so, or will others have the right software to access it? And then the README file and the documentation around reusing it and how the data was gathered and all of that stuff. So yeah, there's a link there to the case study. Please feel free to have a read of it. It's really interesting. Okay, that is everything from me for this afternoon. I'm very happy to take questions. There's also some links here to some additional resources. So if you're thinking about using Figshare for your research data, there are some user guides at help.figshare.com, which document all the processes of using Figshare. And there's a knowledge base, knowledge.figshare.com, for best practices and case studies. And so if you want to learn a bit more, then you're very welcome to. And my email address is there as well. So if you want to reach out with any questions or anything, please do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Miss Megan. Seems we finished on the time. Okay. Okay, so I believe we have learned a lot from the sharing session, okay, about the Figshare. Okay, let us move now to Q&A session. It seems that we have received a lot of questions from the participants. Okay, let me read them one by one. Okay, the first question is from Mr. Muhammad Kamal. Okay, so his question is, what are the main advantages of Figshare as compared to other platforms such as Zenodo and Mendeley Data? Okay.
Yes, so both Zenodo and Mendeley are also what are classified as sort of generalist repositories, which is what Figshare is. So it's not subject specific, it's for any research output in any sort of discipline. The real variance is different features. So all of them will give you things like a DOI for an item and allow you to publish your research. But there are additional features like being able to click through on citations and have a look at where your item's been cited, having that link between funding information and your research data on Figshare, having sort of collaborative private projects and things like that. So it's really around those specific little nuanced features, I think, that I personally feel like sets Figshare apart. But I would encourage you to look at all different repositories for your research data and find the one that is most suitable for your research. So great if that's Figshare, of course. But if that's a subject-specific repository or any of the generalist repositories, then to me, as long as you're making your research data openly and publicly available as best you can, then that's great.
Okay, great. Okay, for the second question, okay, this one from Namita Sentra. Okay, so her question is, what is the difference between institutional access and free access?
That's a good question. So some institutions have an institutional instance of Figshare, and there are some additional features and functionality that exist in that sort of version of Figshare as opposed to the free Figshare.com. So on the institutional version of Figshare, there is something called a review workflow. So it allows institutional administrators to check items before they become publicly available, just to make sure that there's no identifying information in them, or that the metadata is thoroughly documented and things like that. So a bit of a safety net for researchers in that respect. There's also things like custom metadata. So when you upload onto Figshare.com, you'll see a standard set of metadata fields. But if your institution uses Figshare for institutions, then they can configure additional custom metadata fields that are, specific to your institution. There's also things like custom branding. So having sort of the item page on Figshare will have the university logo, and they can have different groups with different outputs for things like departments or labs and things like that. So yeah, I would say that the Figshare for institutions has more, a few more features and some more customizations as opposed to the free Figshare.com.
Okay, Megan, in institutional access, the university or admin also can view the statistic, like how many researchers upload their the data. Is it? Yes.
Yes, that's true as well. Yes, there's a statistics dashboard that's available to the administrators, so they can see. Yeah. So yes, that as well.
It also can filter by the organization or the university, right? But in a free access, it cannot, or it can also.
So they can filter by things like like groups that have been set up within the institution, which might reflect department structures and things like that. So they can look at reporting on that level. And there's a bit of like a search functionality where they can filter based on those groups and things like that. That might be a bit more difficult to do on Figshare.com if it's because it's not all in one sort of container in one place, if that makes sense.
Okay. So now we go for the next question from Mr. Abu Shah Fadli. So his question is, can you show real-time example for multimedia sources in GitHub?
Yes, I don't use GitHub just because I don't write code. But I would be happy to share sort of that example of the GitHub integration and some researchers who have used it, if that would be helpful. It's just because it involves connecting your GitHub account to your Figshare account, and that because I don't have one, I would struggle to show you how to do it. But yeah, there's lots of documentation as well, and I'd be happy to point you in the right direction for how to do that if you'd like to take that further.
Okay. Okay, for the next question is from Abrizah binti Abdullah. So her question is, how does a journal publisher go about partnering with Figshare, publishing about 20 articles per year? Will a data portal be provided like Frontiers? Is there a charge for the data portal?
Yes. So if you are working for a publisher who would like to partner with Figshare to publish their supplemental material, then we'd be happy to have a conversation with you. You can either email me and I can forward it on to the right people, or if you email info, info, at figshare.com and just explain your sort of use case. Then we can get back to you on how best we can provide a service for your journal.
Okay, great. Okay, maybe this one is the not yet. We have still I have the time. Okay. Next the question is from Cik Ram. Okay, so her question is the free version enough for researcher to use in keeping their research data in Figshare?
Is it enough? Is that what they said?
Is the free version enough for researcher to use in keeping their research data in Figshare? Is it okay if they use?
Yeah. I think it depends on the researcher's use case. So if it's in terms of like funder compliance, then Figshare.com is still compliant with funder requirements, as opposed to you needing to use Figshare for institutions or anything like that. So it's perfectly fine for researchers to use Figshare.com in order to meet funder requirements or to make sure that their data is well documented and managed and things like that. So yeah, it's perfectly fine. Hopefully that answered your question. Let me know if not.
Okay, so we go for the last question, Megan. Okay, this one from Zainab Ajab. Okay, how do you measure the impact of shared data?
Yeah. It's a question that has plagued lots of research data managers, is how to measure impact, because to me, it's a combination of factors. So it's looking at those usage metrics, I think more so citations and alt metrics as opposed to views and downloads, because with particular citations, it's easier to see how it's been reused, and so how it's then impacted that particular area of research, if you know what I mean. But there's some documentation as well on our knowledge portal about impact and how it gets measured. But yeah, it's a difficult one, apart from sort of usage metrics and how well it's documented and things like that. It's a very difficult thing to measure. So I'm afraid I don't have any real answers for you other than some of the pieces of the puzzle.
Okay, so great. So seems that looks like we answered all your questions. Okay, if you have any question related to the Figshare, okay, you can email directly to the Miss Megan. Okay, megan@figshare.com. Okay, I think we have come to the end of our webinar. Okay, again, on behalf of organizing committee at USM Library, we would like to express our fullest thanks to our viewers, especially to our speakers, okay, Miss Megan, for spending your valuable time with all of us in this evening. Okay, we want to apologize as well for any inconvenience during this session. We feel so happy to invite all of you again to join our next webinar under Open Science webinar series, whereby we're going to have another topic about sharing research data management by Nanyang Technology University's library in Singapore in November. Okay, so please book your date. Okay, before we end our webinar, okay, don't forget to fill in our e-feedback and to get the e-certificate and CPD points for USM staffs. Okay, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and Facebook page for the latest updates and upcoming event. Okay, so with that note, thank you once again. See you next time. Take care, everyone. Stay safe and healthy. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.